Right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry about the slight delay in starting tonight. Been a busy day. Apologies first, please. Any late items? I have none. I don't think there are any late items. No petitions, I understand. Urgent items to which call-in will not apply. There are none of those. Item 9. Oh, item 9. Okay. Okay, and that's presumably been agreed and okay, thank you. Declarations of interest. Glenn.
Thank you, Chair. I need to declare an interest as an officer in items 12 and 24, and I intend to leave the chamber when they are debated. I'm a director and company secretary of the operating company for the National Eye Centre in Nottingham, who were involved in the tendering process at an earlier stage.
Okay, that's noted. Any other declarations of interest? Okay. Minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of August 2018. A proposer, please. Roy? And a seconder, Alan? Yes? Okay. We can sign them off then. Which takes us to item 7, which are the recommendations from the Executive Scrutiny Board, which I understand was a long event last night. And there are recommendations, but as usual, I think what we'll do is deal with them as the items come up. Is that okay, Glenn? And we'll go through those as we go along. So we'll get straight into the meat of the agenda, which is item 8, first one, Derby Opportunity Area, Developing Emotional Healthy Schools. Would that be you, Andy?
Yep. Thank you, Chair. So Derby is one of 12 opportunity areas. They are government policy and strategy aimed at improving social mobility in areas which have been deemed to be social mobility cold spots. Cabinet previously agreed for the Council to receive an account for the Opportunity Area grant on behalf of the DFE and the Local Opportunity Area Board, and it's expected that all of the funding the Council receives from the DFE through this grant would be awarded to the Opportunity Area programme and allocated in line with the recommendations from the Opportunity Area Board and the DFE. So in addition to the core funding received, which is £6 million over the 3 years of the programme, the Council also receives funding of up to £2.4 million for essential life skills, and that report came through Cabinet in July. The purpose of this report is to give an in principle approval to award a grant of up to £598,000 from the core Opportunity Area grant to Redwood Primary School to lead and coordinate a citywide emotionally healthy school strategy in line with the proposals from the board, and to delegate authority to agree the final terms of the grant agreement to the Strategic Director for People and Resources and the Cabinet Member for Children and Young People. The impact of mental health problems on children and young people's lives is significant, and schools have a clear role to play. And nationally and locally, head teachers have said that the emotional and mental health of young people is a key issue for them. The grant will be used to benefit all schools across the city by procuring a provider for the leadership training for designated mental health leads in every city school, provide grants to schools to develop their own mental health plans and implement these, provide capacity for additional mental health training to designated leads, development of a local offer and network, and development of family support materials for schools to use. This would very much complement what is proposed in the Government Green Paper around identifying senior leads for mental health in schools and creating mental health support teams, but is also very different to what the Green Paper is going to deliver as well. Redwood Primary School was selected by the Opportunity Area Board because they have a strong supporter through the head teacher of this work, and the head teacher is also on the board, and the board believe it's right for the school to take a strategic lead for the improvement of this strategy across the school sector. And I would just move you, Chair, to the recommendations at 2.1 and 2.2, and subject to any questions, I'm happy to pick up the issue raised at exec scrutiny last night.
Yes, thank you. Obviously, I think Councillor Williams would have addressed us on this issue, but had she been here, but she's not. I think we can deal with the recommendations from corporate scrutiny last night in that they welcome the report. They agree the recommendations subject to confirmation that Derby City Council retain ultimate ownership of the proposed mental health portal, so the software and the means to use the information. Are you able to give that reassurance?
Yeah, this discussion was an interesting one last night, and it was in the context of what would happen if Redwood Primary School, which is a maintained school, was to become an academy, and the portal is one of the things that's going to be developed and hosted really by the school, but will affect all schools across the city. I think that in the event, and there's certainly no plans at this point for Redwood to become an academy. They are happy to be a maintained school. They're a good school, so they're not at risk of becoming a sponsored academy. But certainly if Redwood made a decision in the future about becoming an academy, then I think at that point we would need to have a conversation really about where the plans are at in terms of the proposals that Redwood are going to be leading on and commissioning, and that would include the detail of the portal. So I think theoretically I think that's a reasonable recommendation to make, but in terms of how we would enact that, I think we'd have to cross that bridge when we come to it, and at the moment we're not at the point of even thinking about that because Redwood are not in the process of becoming an academy.
Thank you for that. So other than to acknowledge that it should be a scheme that's welcomed, any more comments from Cabinet members on this first? Yes, Roy.
Mental health has been a serious issue for a good number of years. I sit on the Board of Governors of the Trust, and I would welcome anything that helps improve the mental health and well-being of children in our schools.
Thank you. Councillor Skelton.
I was wondering how the outputs are going to be monitored, basically.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So all of the programmes and initiatives that have been agreed at the Opportunity Area Board have both been informed by a strong empirical base, because nothing will get through without good evidence to back it up, and impact and outcomes is being monitored robustly by the Opportunity Area Board and by the DFE. So I can give some assurance that there will be a strong approach taken to what impact this is making.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Andy. In terms of the issue that was raised last night, I think, though, it's not just about should Redwood become an academy. Under 4.8 of the report, Chair, it talks about the role in year 2 of this programme to be to develop a sustainability plan for the maintenance of the portal, most likely making it a sold service to schools. So I think that there will need to be a conversation about the hosting of that portal and the ownership of that portal, regardless of whether or not there's any decision of Redwood moving to academy status, because if there is an opportunity for that to be a sold service to schools, then I certainly believe that we should be administering that, and we're in the best place to provide that service to schools. Thank you, Chair. But again, very much welcome this as a programme. It's much needed and will hopefully benefit children and young people.
Just to come back briefly, I think that's absolutely fair comment, Councillor. I think that certainly one of the things the board's going to be doing in relation to all the programmes as we go into year 2, well, we're in year 2 now, but as we get through year 2 going into year 3, is looking at how we are able to sustain the various programmes going forward and what that's going to mean for the system. So I think that's something that we can pick up.
Okay, so Cabinet, are we agreed on accepting recommendations 2.2 and 2.1? Agreed? So, item 9 is the social impact bond for children in care, and on the edge of children in care again, Ms Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So, social impact bonds are an alternative form of social investment, increasingly used in the public sector to fund service improvements involving local authorities, investors and providers. They are a different way of providing services since payments are made on the basis of clear outcomes being achieved rather than traditional methods of how the council funds or commissions services. So Derby has been working very closely with Nottingham City and Nottinghamshire County in developing a joint approach with a clear focus on developing a social impact bond approach for children in care and on the edge of coming into care, an area which is one of the most significant impacts on our budget in the council. In February, Cabinet gave approval to proceed with a joint procurement for a provider, and following a successful joint procurement process across the 3 local authorities, this report requests approval to enter into final negotiations with the preferred bidder and award a SIB contract, a social impact bond contract. The project aims to help up to 100 children and young people in Derby over 4 years, during which time cases will be referred to receive individual interventions and support, and then outcomes are tracked. The advantages of funding these specific services through a joint SIB model is that an outcomes-based approach incentivises investors and partners to deliver better outcomes. It means that Derby has access to services and interventions that we wouldn't be able to afford necessarily if we were a sole commissioner. And also 25% of the outcome payment has been approved by the Life Chances Fund for the partnership. For Derby, we've estimated cost savings of around 4 million over the life of the contract, of which 1 million is from reduction in placement costs and 3 million in cost avoidance. And outcome payments are made where interventions have been successful. And just to add, Chair, that we've been talking to other local authorities that have used a SIB approach, such as Birmingham, for example, and they have really reported back some very good outcomes and cashable savings, but it is a 4-year longitudinal process in terms of getting to that point. So notwithstanding the recommendations from scrutiny, I would just ask Chair to consider recommendations 2.1 to 2.4, but note that 2.4 links to a paper that will be heard in private session.
Thank you for that. We might as well refer to the Executive Scrutiny Board's recommendation, and they resolved to recommend that Council Cabinet request an update on progress against the intended outcomes at an appropriate time during the lifetime of the contract. I think that almost goes without saying that Cabinet would do that, and I might suggest that even the Executive Scrutiny Board might wish to consider putting it on their agenda at the appropriate point in time too. So is that okay with you?
Yeah, I entirely agree, Chair. I think the key thing, and a good discussion at scrutiny last night, and a good discussion we had with Councillor Williams about ensuring that we identify the right children that goes into the SIB so that we're able to get the right outcomes and the savings from the process. So yes.
So, Councillor Webb.
Will this be able to be read across to children in transition, so from children's to adult services, and will there be any benefits there?
Potentially, yes, Councillor. I mean, the key thing for us and the work that's gone on behind the scenes in preparing for awarding the contract has been to identify the specific children that we think need to be referred in, both those that are currently in high cost placements, particularly in terms of where we're going to get the cashable savings from. Some of those children will be children that may transition into adult services given their particular needs. So I think that there would be an impact positively if those children are in high cost placements where they would likely have ongoing social care needs, in terms of identifying a step down placement and then identifying an appropriate suitable placement as they transition to adulthood. So that long answer to your question is yes. So.
Yes, okay, then if in the absence of any other representations, are we able to agree recommendations 2.1 to 2.4? All agreed? So item 10 is the Derbyshire Business Support Grant Scheme. And just to note, there is a revised report been circulated. Has everybody got that revised report? Yes? Yes, Mr Jennings, I believe, on this one.
Chair, thank you. I'm pleased to introduce this report, which I think is a really positive initiative for businesses and employees across Derbyshire. The proposal is to set up a business grant scheme, i.e. grants direct to businesses. It will be funded out of using an element of the funds captured through the D2 business rates retained fund, the pooled fund, so it won't be through City Council funding. The brief details of this are that the grants will be available for between 2 to 50k. There will be a match funding requirement, usually 50k. Bids will be judged on their merit in terms of promoting economic growth, economic resilience. It's very flexible, can be used for capital or revenue. It can also be used for new or existing businesses. It's proposed it will be run by the City on behalf of the Derbyshire authorities, because we've got significant experience running the DEGF, the Derby Enterprise Growth Fund, and there's already a D2 version of that going, both of which are very successful. Bids will ultimately be assessed by an independent investment panel. The leader does chair that, but we have elected members from Derbyshire on that, together with professionals. Chair, I think this is a really good, robust initiative, and it's a really good example of 11 authorities, districts, Abertire and Unitary, working together for the benefit of the economy and residents of Derby and Derbyshire. Thank you.
Okay, so we have recommendations again from last night, and the Exec Scrutiny recommended that Council Cabinet amend the proposed scheme to reflect that all those liable for business rates were entitled to access funding rather than those that pay business rates. My understanding is this is just to confirm the eligibility of voluntary sector organisations in their ability to bid for this funding, and that the advertising, the second part of that is that the advertising reflects that voluntary sector organisations are also entitled to bid. Bearing in mind that we are the authority running this, Mr Jennings, does that cause any issues in relation to the county?
No, Chair, I think it's perfectly reasonable for Cabinet to accept that. If I may, though, there is one subject to it. It did occur to me, and forgive me, this was after scrutiny last night, that actually the accountable body is technically the county. So can I just suggest we add the words in subject to consultation or agreement of the county? Personally, I do not think that will be a problem whatsoever, but they are the accountable body, so out of respect, I think if we could add that wording in.
So subject to that agreement, we can agree the recommendation from scrutiny. Is there any comments from Cabinet members in relation to the paper itself? Just for me to say, really, I think it is potentially a very positive one. It's a bonus for us to be able to do this, to help and support small businesses across the city and the county, and it comes out of the authority's bid to become a pilot, the county's bid to become a business rates pilot. So it's a bonus for us, which we ought to take advantage of and promote well and look for some good outcomes on. So any other comments in relation to this? Good. Well, in that case, there are recommendations 2.1 to 2.9. Yeah. We, as amended, we can agree those? Pass, thank you. That moves us on to then improvements to the iHub to support an advanced manufacturing research centre pilot. Mr Jennings again.
Chair, if I may, I think this is another really positive initiative. If people recall back in, I think it was April this year, the Council, together with the Local Economic Partnership, entered into a collaboration agreement, or an MOU, with the Nuclear Advanced Manufacturing Research Facility, who are currently based at Rotherham or Sheffield. And that was to seek to open a major facility on Infinity Park. It might be 50,000 square foot facility, R&D facility, the first stage of which was AMRC taking up space within the iHub. That has progressed, they're ready to do that. There are two things we need to do just to help enable that. The first is to carry out some improvements to one of the iHub workshops, and that was partly around the power supply, the electric supply, but it's also the role of shutter doors which are necessary for workshop. Oddly, it was the only workshop without those. Those are improvements which will benefit future tenants as well. It will be part funded by existing funds within the existing capital plan, together with a contribution from the AMRC themselves. The further element is to provide a level of support over the 2-year period to AMRC, and the funding for that, again, will come from the Regen Fund Board. Chair, I think overall this is a really positive initiative. It's significant in terms of our strategy of trying to support and promote Derby's continuing growth as a high-tech economy. AMRC themselves are investing a significant amount of money in the first 2 years, and an even further significant amount of money should the major facility goes ahead. Chair, I'm happy to recommend this.
Okay, so executive scrutiny looked at it and resolved to welcome the report. For me, it represents a fantastic opportunity to introduce a catapult company into this Infinity Park, which represents a massive regeneration of Derby South. Is there any comments from other members? Yes, Councillor Rawson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to welcome this very much. It's really good to see Infinity Park continuing to move forward and develop. The AMRC is a very well-respected organisation, part of the University of Sheffield, and the national network of centres as part of Catapult. So it's really quite prestigious for Derby to be hosting this organisation, and to help develop Infinity Park as well, in terms of attracting new organisations and employers onto Infinity Park. It's really positive, so really welcome this, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Skelton.
Thank you. Yes, I very much welcome this as well. I was just wondering, obviously we're having to do these sort of bit of improvements, alterations to the iHub, whether there's any learning we're going to be doing from this for future buildings, basically, so we kind of learn what we didn't quite do right and next time we do it right first time.
I suspect it's more of a case that it wasn't not done right in the first place. We weren't able to anticipate the needs of this particular company. But Mr. Jennings, perhaps you've got a thought on that?
No, I just have to say, I completely agree with the sentiment. We should always learn from lessons. I don't think we necessarily did anything wrong. I think actually when we were producing a product which was relatively new, it's not something we do very often, and our experience has shown that actually we need more external accessibility to the workshops, hence the role of shutter doors. And experience is also that, and this isn't, we're not unique in this, that there tends to be an underestimation of the power supply in these facilities, and particularly when there's an R&D. So I wouldn't beat ourselves up about it, but you're absolutely right in terms of the sentiment. Always learn the lessons. I think it's a very good point. Thank you.
Okay, with that then, if there's no more contributions, are we able to agree Cabinet points 2.1 and 2.2? Agreed. Item 12 will be Beckettwell regeneration when Glenn's left the room. Otherwise we'd have to shoot him. And he can't be knowing these things. Okay, Mr. Jennings, is it you presenting this one too?
Yes, sorry, Chair. I'll be quiet after this, Chair. This report is also the confidential, so I'm relating to the public report, of course, at the moment. Chair, if I may, I think this is another really significant initiative, challenging initiative for Derby, and is also really, really positive. This report seeks the acquisition of properties in the Beckettwell area to support Beckettwell regeneration. Just to remind you, when I use the phrase Beckettwell, I'm talking about the area around Debenhams, Duckworth Square, and the area immediately around that. We've all known for some time it's an area that's been very challenging. The city's been in decline for a long time. We all know the story, and back in 2016, the city determined it was one of the priorities in the master plan, and subsequently in March 17, the Cabinet determined a very positive, constructive interventionist strategy of buying up land, de-risking it, seeking a development partner. There's also an ice rink element to that, which I shall come back to. And there's been significant progress made against all of that. There is the opportunity now to acquire 2 other parcels of land, which are, I think, significant to the future of it. In the confidential item, it gives significant details about those and the risks and the challenge and how we intend to approach to incorporate those within the regeneration scheme. The site will be funded out of, the proposal is to fund both acquisitions out of local growth funding. And if I may, one of the points that was made last night at scrutiny was which elements of local growth funding, and what I want to do to clarify, just to add to the report, that this will include an element of reallocation of local growth funding currently identified for the performance venue, part of the 8.6 identified for the performance centre. The confidential bit of the report gives significantly more details, of course, but we just wanted to share that in the public element. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions on this.
Corporate scrutiny last night made recommendations on this, but under part item 24 under the confidential papers, so we'll deal with them later. Are there any comments on this from Cabinet first? Lisa?
Yeah, just, sorry, one of the recommendations for executive scrutiny wasn't made under the confidential report, Chair, the second one. It was made, and there's I don't believe there's any reason for that recommendation to be on pink papers.
It is covered on the pink paper side of things. So it's the second recommendation you're talking about in relation to the 2.2, in effect it is, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, having taken a little advice on it, which concurred with my thoughts on the subject, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't deal with it in this part. So the second recommendation from scrutiny last night was to recommend that Council Cabinet reject the recommendation to terminate procurement of an operator for a commercial ice rink and instead pause the process until such time as definitive proposals are available for the regeneration of Becketwell. So I think perhaps we'll give Mr Jennings opportunity to comment on that to start.
Chair, can I just, when I did my introduction, I did miss the ice rink paragraph, and I apologies for that. I was clearly so excited with the acquisition that potential proposed acquisition we missed that, so I do apologise. Yes, as part of the March Cabinet report, there was a decision made to seek to procure an ice rink operator using an EU process, and that was based on advice that there's an interest in having a leisure rink within Derby, and there still is an interest in having a leisure rink in Derby. As people know, that the proposal is not to progress with the ice rink on the Duckworth Square site. And the reasons for that are set out in the report. We might want to expand. But in order to stop a procurement process that we started at Cabinet, we do have to come back to Cabinet for a formal decision. Hence the recommendation 2.2 to terminate the process. In relation to the suggestion that we postpone or we pause the process further, I think the danger is we have already, in effect, slowed it down or paused it, whilst the new administration's had a chance to find its feet and review its priorities in relation to the range of other capital initiatives that are going on. And I think we've probably reached the point where we can't pause it any further without actually being extremely unfair and unprofessional to the bidders who are in there. So my suggestion is that if we are not going ahead with it, we should say that's what we're not doing and say that publicly rather than pause it further.
Okay, I was just about to read or mention some of the comments in here in relation to what corporate scrutiny's concerns were, but I suspect, Lisa, you'd want to raise those anyway. So do you want to comment on this for starters?
So I think, yeah, I mean, there are a number of concerns, Chair. I think the first one is for an administration that's kind of had open and transparent as a tagline since the very beginning, the fact that the administration that wanted to keep it hidden, that the funding or that it was intended to use or to request part of the 8.6 million from the LEP that had been designated for the performance venue to pay for these acquisitions.
Can we deal with the recommendation that you asked to be brought forward? Because that was in relation to the ice rink side of things, wasn't it?
What the
second recommendation, which we just allowed with all openness and transparency, and was in relation to pausing the process in relation to the.
Do you want me to comment on that first, then?
So that's what I'm inviting comments.
I'll come back to the other. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think the reality is that there have been no concrete reasons given for not going ahead with the ice rink. There was an extensive piece of work done, which went out to the market to suggest that an ice rink was a viable proposition for that area. And I think the worry is that pausing, £190,000 has been spent on this procurement process to date, and that stopping that procurement process, obviously that £190,000 would be lost, but also that to completely stop the process of moving towards an ice rink when there is absolutely no alternative plan for that site at this stage seems quite reckless, really. And so I think, pausing it and actually waiting until a viable plan is developed for that area would be much more sensible.
Okay, thank you for dealing directly with that then for starters. Yes, £190,000 has been spent by the previous administration on a procurement process. Not a penny has been spent on it since. The administration, I believe, and the Cabinet will confirm this with their view on it, but the current, the potential for a ice rink on Beckettwell Lane does not form part of the current administration's plans, or indeed those of developers that the previous administration entered into a year's exclusive discussions on the area. Those discussions, those developments, those plans have moved on greatly, and I think we take the view that it wouldn't be fair, proportionate or right to give any indication that we were prepared to consider further on that procurement process in relation to an ice rink, and that's the stance that I take on the subject and the subject to confirmation. Any members of the Cabinet want to add to that? Any other comments in relation to that? Yes, Councillor Graves.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to emphasise what you've just spoken about. It was a very difficult meeting last night, particularly this subject, and it became quite unfair on officers who were trying to justify a political decision. It's very good that you've now clarified that, because that makes a huge difference. The argument is that whilst you're cancelling this, terminating this contract, their argument was that you've got no clear plans for the future, and that was why they said let's pause it rather than continue it. It would have been very useful last night had the Cabinet member been available to take those sort of questions.
Yeah, thank you for that. We do have a clear plan. The clear plan is to continue with the 12 months exclusive rights that were given to the current potential developer by the previous administration to work up their proposals. So as I say, those proposals are getting more and more detailed. They are doing due diligence in producing those proposals and talking to and conferring with all the relevant parties in the area. And if the proposals as outlined to us in updates along the way are actually quite exciting, and looking forward to be able to bring them to Cabinet at the earliest opportunity. So it's not a case that we haven't got a clear plan. That plan is work in process, and it will be exciting when it actually gets here. So I take your point in relation to the officers' presence there, or the Cabinet members' presence, but for commercial reasons, he wouldn't have been able to go into any further detail than I've just alluded to anyway. So any other comments from Cabinet? So in terms of the public section of this, then, we need to agree the recommendations, or refer to the recommendations, which are at 2.1 and 2.2.
Comments. I have further comments on the rest of the open section of this report before you move on, which I started before. So the firstly being the question as to why the administration did not want the public to know that they were planning to request that part of the £8.6 million from the LEP that had been put aside for the new performance venue was going to be used.
Sorry, just a second. Yes, Councillor Ralston.
Well, but be fair, Greg Jennings just announced that, and also the reason. So he actually, at the beginning of the meeting, if you were listening, Councillor Ralston said that that was the plan, and added to the report and said that in his presentation. But also, it was in the LEP papers. So that's the point, that in the LEP papers for the meeting tomorrow, it was made very public that that was a proposal, and one of the members of the press here has tweeted that. And so why on earth, on that basis? Well, I haven't finished yet, thanks, Chair. You're trying to shut me down again. I haven't finished yet. So on that basis, why did the administration consider that they needed to keep it secret when and not tell the public that that was the plan?
Exactly my point. You've just absolutely demonstrated the fact that we've not been secret about this. It's in the D2N2 papers. We've acknowledged it tonight. The full detail is in the second part of the meeting, entirely for commercial reasons, which has been accepted as valid commercial reasons. It's no secret. It's something we are glad to discuss, and you'll hear the detail later in the meeting. So to suggest that it was any clandestine move by us is totally false. It's in the public papers. We've acknowledged it tonight, and we'll deal with it in the part two. So, moving on, Cabinet.
You then, Chair, because I have other comments as well. It wasn't in the public papers. The only reason it's now been made public is because I have further comments. So
I'm going to move to the Cabinet. Cabinet, do you want to
are you not going to allow me to speak on the rest of this paper, Chair?
No, you started on the same subject. I'm moving on.
Well, I'm responding to what you said, but I also have further comments
Cabinet,
on this.
Can we take recommendations 2.1?
So you are shutting me down and not allowing me to make comments on the rest, make the comments that I have on the rest of this document.
And you've had your answer on it. I'm moving on.
But I have other comments that refer to other parts.
Cabinet members, are we able to agree 2.1 and 2.2 of this recommendation? Agreed? Thank you. Item 13 is the Highways Infrastructure Asset Management paper. I will just wait for Glenn to come back.
Chair? Chair?
Yes, sorry. It's Alan.
I think you ought to be specific that you're rejecting the recommendation from scrutiny.
Oh, yes, thank you for pointing that out, yes. Yes, on this occasion we're not able to accept the recommendation on the previous item. That can be noted. Thank you, Anna.
I'll give a brief introduction, and I have got backup here in case there's some more technical questions. So this report seeks to adopt the new Highway Infrastructure Asset Management Framework Policy and Strategy for the Council. It's something that we have been doing as a result of guidance produced through Department for Transport, improving codes of practice around asset management. So therefore we are bringing this to Cabinet for approval so that our officers can work within those codes. It's important that we get this adopted for the Council so that we can make sure we look after our assets appropriately, but also it will give us access to funding opportunities going forward. So these are the first of a number of documents that are likely to come forward to Cabinet on this basis. So at the moment, the recommendations are set out in 2.1 and 2.2. I do actually have an additional recommendation that I just wanted to add around a delegation to delegate authority to Strategic Director of Communities in Place in consultation with Cabinet Member for Neighbourhoods and Street Pride to monitor, review and update the documents on an annual basis, and that will enable us to keep these as very live documents and not be coming back to Cabinet on an annual basis, so we can keep them up to date in that way. Obviously, if anyone's got any more detailed questions, we're happy to take them. Thank you, Chair.
So we made a note of that additional recommendation. It would be 2.3 effectively, or whatever. Corporate scrutiny looked at this and resolved to welcome the report, I believe. So 13. Resolved to note the report, thank you. So any comments on this? Yes, Councillor Eldred.
Am I allowed to speak, Chair?
You're able to
You're
ask a question on the subject, by all means.
You're going to cut me off halfway through. I'm certainly not limited.
Depends on your contribution, Councillor.
I'm not going to be limited to just asking questions.
Unless you get on with the question, then we'll move on.
Right. Well, it is not. I am not limited to asking questions in this forum, and you cannot limit me to asking questions in this forum. And I cannot believe that you are sitting there and pretending that you're being open and transparent, and you are trying to curtail my right to speak.
Do you have a question?
In terms of the Highway Infrastructure Asset Management, the most recent annual engineers inspection shows that we would need, as a city, 20 to 21 million pounds worth of investment in our highways infrastructure in order to bring it up to a reasonable level. We would then also need around 4.9 million pounds annually to maintain that infrastructure at a reasonable level. We currently get around £2 million a year from government towards our highways infrastructure management. As a ward councillor, or all of us as ward councillors will know that potholes and the condition of roads and pavements are a massive issue for people in this city. And the problem that we're coming against is if we carry on in this vein, our highways infrastructure will just continue to deteriorate because we simply don't have the resource to maintain it. So my question, Chair, is what are you, as the Conservatives, going to do about this funding gap?
Do you have any questions in relation to the Highways Infrastructure Asset Management paper that's before you? I don't consider that relevant to this particular paper. I'm going to move on from there unless there's any... Yes, Councillor Skelton.
Right. Looking at the list of various, I think it's, policies, documents that's listed down, there doesn't seem to be anything there about within all the processes that we do and the actual works that we do, waste minimisation, and also things that we can do, for example, to increase the market for recycled plastics. For example, I know obviously we do at the moment a lot of bollards or the black plastic from recycled plastic. Apparently now you can also get curbstones, and obviously other problems, I think manhole covers as well. So these sorts of things, are these going to be picked up within these documents?
Yes.
Okay, thanks for the question, Councillor. As Christine said at the very start, this is the start of a process. There are a number of documents to come through, and the detail in how we carry out works will be included in those documents as and when they are produced. And we are aware of the need for sustainable practices within highways, definitely. Okay.
Any other contributions? In that case, we have recommendations 2.1 and with the additional recommendation as outlined by officers. Are we able to accept those? Thank you. Item 14 then is a variation to the waste disposal contract.
Thank you, Chair. So we have a contract in place for our dry recyclables that runs until March 2020. However, there have been issues raised with our contractor about the increase in costs associated with the recyclable market created by the fall in demand for material from China. And so we have been in negotiation with them about how to deal with that situation, and having had a significant amount of negotiation, we are now recommending to Cabinet that there is a variation in the payments that we make as part of that. Detail of those are in the private paper, but we are now recommending to Cabinet that that variation to be approved, Chair.
So, corporate scrutiny looked at this and resolved to note the report. Are there any other comments? Yes, Councillor Skelton.
Just really, obviously the particular issues are outlined in, I think, the other report, but has any thought been given to what we can do differently to make sure in the future that we can get over these sorts of issues? So, as I said before, about increasing our own use of recycled products and things like that to give a demand further down the line for recycled products, so the actual costs that we get when we're disposing of things are not as high.
I think I'll pass that to officers to answer, but from my point of view, my understanding is that these charges are very flexible, very variable, and that's what's happened in this case. The contract's up for renewal very soon, and I'm sure all those considerations will be part and parcel of that contract negotiation. Did you want to add anything, Christine?
I think only just to confirm that we are working with consultants and in partnership with the County Council around these issues to plan for the re-procurement of the contract and to take into account the issues that you've said and that changing market.
So, recommendations 2.1 to 2.3, be able to agree them, Cabinet? Thank you. Item 15 then is compulsory acquisition of empty homes. It's going to be presented by Councillor Jennings. Not Councillor.
Right. Yes, thank you. We'd better move on swiftly from that one. Thank you, Chair. I think the Council has had over the last few years, over the last few years, the Council had a really good record in reducing the numbers of long-term empty homes in the city by, I think, over a third. And that's something we should be proud of for all the obvious reasons. One of the ways in which we do that is, and it's generally as a last resort, we will seek to compulsory purchase the CPO properties. We do that in parallel with voluntary negotiation, but it is a way of trying to bring properties that have been empty for many years back into use. The process would then rely on us either we sell them on to somebody who is prepared to and is committed to bring them back into use in the next 12 months, or they go to Derby Homes to add towards the sort of the Derby Homes housing stock. Chair, I think this is really a positive report. You'll have seen many of these over the years, I am sure. The details for the specific properties are, of course, in the confidential items, in the confidential pages. Thank you, Chair.
So, Executive Scrutiny looked at this and resolved to welcome the report on this occasion. Any other contributions, questions on this subject? Yes, Councillor Graves.
Just a quick comment, Chair. It's good to see that the regularity of papers like this coming to Cabinet, not just in this administration, but in previous administrations as well. The regularity of this is very good for the city. It's important that we don't have empty houses when we've got so many people looking for accommodation. So that is why this is welcomed by executive scrutiny, because I think we're all on the same wavelength, and we really need to bring as many houses back into operation as we can.
Thank you for that contribution on behalf of the Executive Scrutiny Department Committee last night.
Can I just ask why Councillor Graves is allowed to make comments and I'm not?
He's just commented
And I'm
on behalf of the
restricted
Executive.
to asking questions. Well, why is Councillor Graves different in that sense to me?
I've just explained that.
Oh, because he is chair. So you're saying that because... Can I get some constitutional advice on this, please, from the monitoring officer? Is it correct to say that the chair of executive scrutiny in a cabinet member is entitled to make comments, and yet other elected members are not, and they are restricted only to questions?
The Cabinet Procedure Rules allow opposition spokespersons, overview and scrutiny, the leader or deputy leader of each political group, and there is an issue there as to whether it is one or the other, will be invited to attend the first part of meetings of Cabinet, which is what we're in at the moment, during consideration of items, and can speak but not vote. The conduct of a meeting generally is within the discretion of the chair of the meeting as well.
To clarify, there is absolutely no constitutional there's nothing in the Constitution that inhibits
Councillor Williams, did you indicate...
making comments and instead of just asking questions.
Did you want to comment, Councillor Williams?
Actually, just to follow on from what Councillor Graves has said, I think this is really good that we're seeing these come into Cabinet. We need to see more of these. It's such a shame it's such a long drawn-out legal process, and hopefully anything that we can do to get that process obviously legally shorter would be welcome, but hopefully we can get these houses back into use, and I look forward to seeing more of these reports coming in front of us.
Thank you. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Williams, for that comment, because I'm looking at ways of trying to make this process slicker and quicker. We have on average over 1,000 empty properties in the city at any one time, and I do find that some lengths of time vary as to how long we allow properties to remain empty, and members of the public play a useful role in indicating empty properties in the city. I would first of all like to commend the work that the officers are doing on this work and the continued work that they're doing, and I'm hoping to bring forward a lot more of these reports, because it is a way forward of not just removing empty properties, but making properties accessible for people to live in. And as we know, we have lots of people on our housing waiting list.
Thank you. Councillor Skelton.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's not just obviously the provision of new housing that benefits the local community when we get an empty house back into use, but also quite often while they are empty and for the length of time they're empty, they can be a sort of magnet for vandalism and all sorts of other things, which can often spread to neighbouring properties as well, causing a lot of distress to the neighbours that are living there. So I very much welcome what Councillor Webb said about getting the process slicker and quicker. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Eldred, was there any question that you wanted to ask, or any contribution to the debate that to help the Cabinet make their decision on this without making speeches or political point scoring?
Again, the Constitution says that I have the right to speak. Chair, I do not have any comments on this, but I will reserve my right to speak in any capacity that I see fit, and I will not be told by anybody how to make a contribution in a meeting. If I have the right to speak, I have the right to speak.
Thank you. Cabinet, are we able to agree these recommendations 2.1 to 2.2? Thank you. Item 16 then, building safer and stronger communities.
Thank you, Chair. This report sets out some proposals to look at renewing and refreshing our partnership arrangements across the city around two key priorities, the Safer and Stronger Communities agenda. The refresh is part of a wider initiative to strengthen and improve Council's partnership arrangements and to build stronger relationships with its partners across the city. So this report sets out re-establishing an outcome board which sits alongside other outcome boards within our Derby partnership, looking to create a safer and stronger strategic outcomes board. And beneath that board, we were also proposing that we have two new partnership boards. One would be a Safer Communities Board and the other a Stronger Communities Board. The Safer Communities Board has actually been established over the last few months, and they have developed a terms of reference which is attached in the appendix. The Stronger Communities Board, we feel we need to work more closely with our voluntary sector and community partners to establish who should be on that board and the approach that we would take, but that's obviously subject to endorsement from Cabinet this evening. So, as I say, this is something that has been being discussed for some time now. It came about and was raised through the peer challenge report that was done about the council in terms of our partnership arrangements, and this is in response to that as well. So I want to put forward recommendations 2.1 to 2.3, Chair.
Thank you. Again, Executive Scrutiny considered this last night, and they resolved to recommend to Council Cabinet that the Safer and Stronger Outcomes Board should include a representative from the community and voluntary sector, either as Chair of the Stronger Communities Board or as an additional representative on the Strategic Outcomes Board. Christine, did you want to comment on that, on the process of setting these boards up? I assume the boards will select their own chair?
Yes, what we would propose is that following this meeting we would look to talk to our partners in those various sectors to look at which representatives we would like on those boards, and we pull those people together, and then that board would, as you say, select who they feel would be an appropriate chair.
So in essence we can agree the recommendation of the Scrutiny Board?
Yes, I'm happy with that, and as I say, I think Scrutiny Board were keen that the Strategic Board had a representative from the voluntary and community sector. So if the chair of that board wasn't from that sector, then this is suggesting we would have an additional place on that Strategic Board from the community and voluntary sector, which I think would be wholly appropriate, Chair.
Okay, so with that acceptance of that recommendation, any comments further to that? So then, Cabinet, can we accept recommendation 2.1 to 2.3 on this? Thank you. Item 17 then is the Corporate Asset Management Plan. Yes, Mr. Dinesh, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the aim of this Corporate Asset Management Plan is to strengthen the use and value of the Council's property assets, which is a substantial resource with a value of circa £500 million. The Asset Management Plan, which is in Appendix 2, is a medium-term plan which was developed with services to improve changing service needs, to support the Derby growth and development, and to drive up value for money. So in addition to refreshing the property rationalisation programme that the Council has been implementing for some years, the Asset Management Plan will also help to implement a more systematic approach to improving those assets which are required for the longer term, the core assets. The Council Cabinet is recommended to approve the Corporate Asset Management Plan, which on a periodic basis we will come back to Cabinet with progress and if there's any updates required. Thank you.
I think it's fair to say the council's had to deal with issues in relation to property management in the not too recent past. I think it's appropriate to update this corporate asset management plan to keep on top of these matters. I don't know if the Cabinet member wanted to comment on the report itself.
Yes, thank you, Chair. There is, of course, the copy of the plan within the bundle, and there is a forward in there which in actual fact was signed off by myself. I think it's very important, and I say it's healthy as well, that this asset management plan in actual fact does give great guidance and detail as to how we manage our assets. And after all, we own a considerable amount of property within this city, and not only have we got to look after it for the future or the years in the future, but we also have to look after it now in relation to maintaining it, etc. So it cannot be lost, the fact that we own this great asset, and we own it on behalf of the city, and as such we are the sole incumbents at this moment in time on managing on behalf of the city. And so I welcome this report, and I thank my colleagues or the officers for in actual fact putting it together.
Okay, so the Executive Scrutiny Board resolved to note the report. Are there any other comments? In that case, are we able to accept recommendation 2.1, please? Thank you. So, item 18 is the A52 Wyvern Improvements Scheme update. Christine.
Thank you, Chair. So this report provides an update on the work that's been carried out since the A52 Wyvern Transport Improvement Scheme was last reported to Cabinet on the 13th of June earlier this year, and it seeks approval for some further recommendations to enable works to progress as efficiently and effectively as possible at an optimum cost. It's perhaps worth reminding ourselves, although we are in an extremely difficult position, that this scheme will improve road safety and reduce congestion and delays to transport accessing and egressing the Wyvern Retail Park and Pride Park from and to the A52, and to traffic using the A52 into Derby. The design will also provide for new and improved access for sustainable transport modes and supports the wider economic growth within the city. Over the last few months, the progress we've made is to significantly strengthen our governance arrangements. We've increased our project management and engineering design resources, and we're supported by independent technical experts providing assurance on the future delivery of the project. In recent weeks, works have progressed to enable the construction of the A52 westbound third lane, so that's coming into the city, and we've also recently instructed works to progress to complete the outbound A52 work to create a third lane outbound between the Wyvern on-slip and the Rainsway junction. But at the time of writing the June Cabinet report, it was envisaged that the detailed design and pricing works would have reached a stage where a final scheme cost estimate could have been presented to this Cabinet meeting, and that would have enabled consideration of the full future financial implications. But unfortunately, this isn't the case. Due to significant complexities of the scheme, we're not in a position to report the final scheme cost estimate to this meeting. The main reasons for this are that the design engineers, having reviewed and analysed the original designs, working with an updated site survey, it's become clear that the project is more complex than was originally envisaged in terms of getting to that final design. There are issues with the original designs that need to be updated to integrate with the works that have already been constructed. There are also other factors, particularly relating to ground conditions, construction that have also emerged through this review process that require further analysis. So that's why we are here, I guess, asking and seeking approval for some further recommendations. The June Cabinet report also suggested that the scheme cost we expected would be in the order of 30 million. We don't have a further update on that, except to say that clearly this has become more complex than we originally thought, and therefore, you know, it would be remiss of me not to say that it is possible that that scheme cost would increase. But we are continuing to work as quickly and as practically as possible to develop the final scheme cost estimate for Cabinet to consider, which we are envisaging will be in late autumn, and with a report back to Cabinet as soon as possible thereafter. But in order to make sure that we can deliver the scheme as efficiently and effectively and at that optimum cost, what this report recommends are kind of two key recommendations. The first is to delegate authority to the Strategic Director of Communities and Place, to myself, in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Regeneration and Public Protection and the Strategic Director of Corporate Resources, to make some of those executive decisions around potential scheme changes and instructing of works that we would perhaps ordinarily come back to Cabinet with, but because any works to be instructed need to be done quickly in order to make sure that we are making best use of the resource, then it's recommended that that is delegated to officers. And the second key recommendation is that in order to ensure that we are, meeting our financial procedure rules, that it's recommended that we increase the operational budget for the project to 33 million. Now, that doesn't mean that we are going to spend up to 33 million. What it means is that if there is appropriate work that can be instructed that is considered to be the best way forward, then it gives us the ability to do that. It doesn't mean that we will, instruct work if we do not think it is appropriate. The report also then goes on to set out that it's proposed that the funding for that increase in the budget is initially coming from the budget risk reserve, but there will be a full financial analysis going on with regard to the final scheme cost. So hopefully that's provided members with an update. There is more detail in the report. There is also an element within the private and confidential section. I do appreciate that this is continues to be a difficult issue. Officers are working as hard as they can to get this to a place where we are all feeling more comfortable. But, the recommendations are before you from 2.1 to 2.4 as to how I believe this is the best way forward, Chair.
Thank you. Cabinet, you'll recall that in line with our policy of openness and transparency in such matters, as soon as we became aware of a change in circumstances in relation to the A52 costs and ability to finalise the designs, we made the issues public. They've been fully debated in public. We've been open and transparent, shared the detail of what the situation is. The finer points and details are covered later in the report. It was considered by the Executive Scrutiny Board last night, and they've come with 3 recommendations, so I propose to deal with those in turn. The first one is to recommend that Council Cabinet rejects recommendations 2.2 and 2.3, pause the project until such times as a full and frank assessment of the total costs and the timescales for delivery has been completed. Perhaps, Christine, you might want to comment on the potential consequences of that and the capacity to be able to do that, in fact.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. One of the key issues around pausing the project is that we do have a cost associated with that from the contractor, which is noted and was discussed at Executive Scrutiny last night, of a cost of around 40,000 a week for simply them being on site and maintaining whatever traffic management would be required to keep the site safe. So if we pause the project, then there is that inevitable cost of delay. And if we terminate the contract, then we're into a whole other debate around the clauses of termination within the contract. But this isn't what, you know, this recommendation suggests. It does suggest pausing the project. And I think that, from my perspective, if we don't believe that there is appropriate and economic work that the contractor can do on site, then we won't instruct them to do it. So there may well be a reduction in the amount of work that's going on. But if we completely pause, then we will lose any ability to get work done economically. So we have a window, you know, over the next few months that if the weather continues to be good, then we would be able to take advantage of getting elements of work done. But we will only progress those elements of work if we consider that it to be the right thing to do to deliver the project in the most economic way.
Okay, so I'll deal with the second recommendation then, and that is that the Council Cabinet approach other partners in the project, i.e. Highways England, to identify additional resources for completion of the A52 improvements. Are you able to confirm that's a process which is already in motion?
Yeah, we have been in discussion with the funders. Predominantly, it has been the local enterprise partnership. So I think if members are minded to accept this recommendation, then it will be helpful for us to then be able to go back and talk in more detail with those other partners. I think it's probably unlikely that they will have additional funding, but that does not mean that we shouldn't have the conversation and share with them the position that we're in.
And the final recommendation is to recommend to Council Cabinet that all councillors are provided with information in relation to any delegated decisions taken as part of the project to ensure appropriate democratic oversight. Christine, are you able to confirm that regular project board meetings are held? The Cabinet member is responsible, holds weekly meetings with yourselves. Delegated decisions are delegated for a purpose, and the process would be subverted by this recommendation. Or your thoughts in relation to that?
I can confirm that we are in weekly dialogue with the Cabinet member. The Cabinet member is on the corporate project board and, you know, is involved in any of the delegated decisions in consultation, and they will be appropriately recorded. I think that if we are taking decisions, significant decisions about changes to the design, I think it would be appropriate to brief other councillors. However, you know, in terms of do I think we've got appropriate and normal processes in place to deal with this? Yes, we have.
And I take it I know you do have shadow cabinet meetings and meetings with leaders of the groups, and they're more than entitled to ask the questions and be informed of the process. There's nothing in what we're doing to hide, but it's absolutely not necessary to notify all councillors of all the potential changes to the scheme.
No, as you say, we brief shadow cabinet and councillors as they request that. So in that regard, you know, informing all councillors on all the decisions is significantly in excess of what we would ordinarily do. It would be certainly probably easier to manage if we were briefing through shadow cabinet and other leaders, Chair.
Okay, so having looked at the recommendations, is there any other? Yes, Councillor Ralston.
I suppose from my point of view, I wanted to speak on this from a cabinet point of view, and also as Bondon resident who travels that road every day. It is massively frustrating for everybody involved, but and it's difficult for me to not refer back to the fact that this is an inherited problem, and that we're, you know, with an internal investigation underway at the moment, it makes it very difficult to make a real any significant comments around this. So my frustration is, and my reassurance that I request, is that we have to carry on with this. We have no alternative. We can't leave the A52 in the state that it is at the moment. And my request is from you for reassurances that we're carrying out work that is needed, that won't have to be redone, that isn't going to cause any financial strain. Because for me, £40,000 a week of public funds by pausing this project is just not acceptable. It's already significantly overspent on the original budget, however that was set, and I think it's very important that we manage that public funds going forward to the best of our ability, and I will be asking questions on a weekly and regular basis, not only on a financial basis but on a local councillor basis, and we just need that reassurances from you, Christine, that this is now top priority to resolve this as soon as possible.
Chair, I'm happy to give that reassurance. It is absolutely my top priority to get this resolved. We are constantly reviewing the level of resources that we have, the advice that we're getting, and reviewing things on a weekly basis to make sure that we are delivering on this project as quickly and efficiently as we can.
So I think Councillor Williams was next.
Thank you. Again, like Councillor Walston, Spondon resident, use it every day. Again, extremely frustrated. But what I would like to know is, can you give us some assurances now that you feel that you are adequately resourced to make sure that the teams have got the competencies, that they've got everything that they need, and that you're confident now with what's been put in place that they can deliver what we're asking them to do? Or is there anything else that you need from us? Because I'd rather know now than come back in a couple of months' time and say, actually, we need X, Y, and Z. We need to be assured that what we've got now and that the teams have got those resources and competencies to actually get it done and finished. And you can hear my frustration, and I apologise for that, but it is really hard, particularly with the residents saying, why are we doing this? And so actually I do think you talked earlier about the benefits that this is going to bring. We need to re-emphasise what those benefits are and make sure that as a city we are going to realise those benefits, because, you know, that really is the ultimate outcome, isn't it? We've got to do that, but we've also got to make sure that the public know what those benefits are.
So, Christine, are you able to confirm that we've actually had this conversation on a number of occasions, and we sought reassurances from yourself that you have adequate resources, that lack of resources cannot be a reason for not delivering the best possible job in relation to the A52?
Yes, Chair, I can assure you we have got the resources in place. We've significantly increased them, as I referred to earlier. We have new design engineers on board. We have independent technical experts providing us with guidance and assurance. We will probably bring in more resources as we need them, but we will make that judgment on a weekly basis. So we will be bringing in some additional quantity surveyors when we have the up-to-date cost estimates coming through from the contractor. So all of those things are being reviewed on a regular basis. But I am, you know, I can assure you that I've got all the resources that I think I need as appropriate at this time to get those detailed designs done as quickly as we practically can and get them to the contractor for pricing.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at paragraph 1.12, just wanted really some reassurance that I presume, obviously, the review, the investigation is ongoing, and I'm sure you'll have had some interim results, shall we say, from it. Just to say, obviously, if there are things that have already shown up that need to be lessons learned, if you like, just some reassurance that they are being implemented as the project goes on.
Thank you for that question. Yes, I can absolutely assure you that we are constantly seeking reassurance from officers that the investigation is ongoing, that it's being conducted in an appropriate manner, that they have the resources necessary to be able to conduct the investigation properly and fully, and to be able to result it. I've also sought, we've actually, as an administration, taken a conscious decision not to interfere in the investigation. It's not appropriate for us to try or even be accused or suggested that we might try and influence the investigation. It's an independent investigation carried out by our own auditing. Well, it's the Central Midlands Audit Partnership. Thank you, Roy. And we're content with those reassurances, and having ensured that the progress is shared with the external auditors, we've sought reassurances from officers that should there be a point where we need to get detail and update on the progress of the investigation, it will be referred to us if it's felt that the investigators reach a point where there's information they think we need to have without influencing them, or that they think, or the external auditors think, that we need to act on. We've sought and got reassurances that that will be the case. So the current position is that the investigation is ongoing, it's work in progress, and it's getting no interference whatsoever from this administration. When it is resulted, and we won't rush them into a result on that, but we've given assurances previously that when it is resulted, it will be made public and we will action it. And that's the current position. I anticipate that to be the ongoing position unless those circumstances change whereby the people involved feel we need to know a different position. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's fair to say that this project is a real mess, and it's making all councillors of all elected members very nervous. This particular report is particularly nervous because it doesn't give a final scheme plan, and that makes all councillors particularly nervous. Nervous in the fact that you're asking for more money, which I'm going to assume that you're going to agree, the Cabinet members are going to agree tonight, without the assurance that that is all you're going to ask for. So within that, what makes me particularly nervous about that is it seems that you've given the existing contractors a blank checkbook, and they may abuse that blank checkbook. And that makes me, as an individual elected member, very nervous. And I'm sure it makes all the councillors on this authority nervous. And maybe some particular councillors more nervous than others, I don't know. Some of the questions I'd like to ask is that one of the recommendations, 2.2, is about delegated authority. I'd be interested to know who had delegated authority on the initial scheme. Whether we have some information on that, and the reason that the recommendation came from the scrutiny about rejecting 2.2 and 2.3 was the fact that there is this unknown in the amount of money. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think you perhaps picked up on the frustration of some of Cabinet that we're not in a different position to where we are now. That will have to be dealt with whenever in due course, but we are where we are. We're in a position where, unfortunately, we still can't finalise designs and therefore reach a final price. I'm sure Christine will be able to comment in relation to checks and balances on the compensation issues that the contractors are bringing up. But in relation to the initial scheme of delegations, I'm sure that's in the relevant papers from the time, and I'm sure that will feature in any investigations to what might have gone right or might have gone wrong in these circumstances. So, Christine, did you want to talk in relation to checks and balances in relation to compensation claims?
Yes, I can. So the way in which the contract is written, clearly the contractor submits to us what they call a compensation event for any additional work that they believe they have incurred. They have to justify that, and our contract manager has to approve that amount. So there are processes in place. They can't, you know, it isn't a blank cheque, but I can't pretend that it's a place that you would want to be with a contractor. And we will be doing everything that we can to make sure that what we're paying is what it is going to cost, not what the contractor thinks it should cost.
Okay, so the last person to indicate that they wish to speak was you, Councillor Eldred. Did you want to
Really,
make a comment?
I think, this £15 million, Cabinet's been asked to approve over £15 million in less than 3 months on this project. And the reason why that exec scrutiny recommendation was made was partly on the basis that this is without any indication that it isn't going to be another 2 months or another 1 month before you get a similar request for 7 or 8 or more million pounds. We have absolutely no idea what the final cost of this project is going to be. We have absolutely no idea how long it's likely to be delayed for. And we don't know what went wrong in the first place because the investigation isn't complete. And really, now is the time, I think, to say enough is enough. And that there is a need to stop and review and not carry on until we are absolutely clear where this is going to end up in terms of cost and where it's going to end up in terms of timeframes. Yes, there is a cost associated with that. I appreciate that. We do have to be very careful with public money, but you are being asked to approve over £8 million with no idea what that money is going to be spent on, really. No idea whether or not that's going to be the final amount or whether or not there's going to be more that you're going to be requested to put into this project. It's a blank cheque, as Councillor Graves has said. So actually pausing for a specified amount of time to actually finalise the plans, finalise the designs, finalise the final costing would seem to me a very prudent thing to do at this stage. I have to say as well that given now the scale of the overspend and now that we're more than double the original projections, we have to be at the stage where where we have an independent investigation in this. By your own admission, Chair, internal audit, although they do a fantastic job, are not independent. And given that something has gone chronically wrong with this project from the beginning, we need to have external eyes on that, and we need to have somebody independent and come in and review what has happened and give us an indication of what needs to change in the authority to make sure it doesn't happen again. So the advice from executive scrutiny is pause. Please take this opportunity to pause and reflect and make sure that we're doing the right thing, that the plans are in place and that we know how much this project is going to cost before we move forward.
Thank you for that contribution. I think we've made it perfectly clear our position in relation to the investigation. Christine, did you want to add anything to your comments, the pros and cons in relation to pause or not pause?
I'm not really sure there's much I can add to the situation. My advice is that we leave ourselves the option to be able to award and instruct additional work if we think that that is the most appropriate thing to do, and this is what this recommendation allows us to do.
So, in the absence of any other comments, we have to deal with the recommendations. Well, just to be clear, my interpretation is that we're not able to agree the corporate scrutiny's recommendation number 1 in relation to pausing it. We are in relation to recommendation 2, that is the current position, and it will probably enhance our ability to talk to partners in this situation, so we can agree the second recommendation. But we're unable to agree the third recommendation because it would be unnecessary. So that's the position, I think, Cabinet in relation to the scrutiny recommendations, which leaves us to go back to the recommendations in the original report, which are 2.1 to 2.4. Are we able to agree those, Cabinet? Thank you. Moving then on, item 19 is the performance monitoring Q1 results, and that's Heather, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. This report presents the performance reports from the 1st of April to the 30th of June for the Council scorecard, so-called Quarter 1. The latest performance monitoring data shows that 69% of Council scorecard measures are on track to achieve their year-end target, of which 46% of measures achieved their quarterly target. The summary dashboard of all measures is shown in Appendix 2, and the improvement report can be found in Appendix 3. We have highlighted achievements to date, whilst it is still relatively early in the year, at paragraphs 1.3 and 412 onwards. Ultimately, we know that there are also areas that the Council needs to improve. These are highlighted at paragraph 418 onwards. Many of these areas will be considered by scrutiny over the next 6 months, and we've included more detail on that. There are 3 recommendations as shown at between 2.1 and 2.3.
So Executive Scrutiny Board resolved to note the report. Any comments from Cabinet? Yes, Councillor Ralston.
Just to thank Heather for bringing this report, but also, more importantly, to thank all the work that's gone into getting these targets. It's a very difficult time for this council. We've got some very big, tricky projects, some situations going off, but the ground day-to-day workings and things that everybody's doing is very much appreciated, and this report highlights that we are trying to maintain a business-as-usual positive approach to this council. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? In that case, Cabinet, can we approve recommendations 2.1 to 2.7, please? Agreed. Thank you. Okay, so item 20 is compliance with contract and procedure rules. Mr McClure, I believe.
Thank you, Chairman. There are 5 subject areas requiring approvals of Cabinet, and there are 7 recommendations included in the report. The first one, we've got to achieve the final agreement position with Network Rail, and we're asking for approval to add the London Road Rail Bridge scheme to the Highways and Transport Capital Programme. The second one is asking Cabinet to approve the addition of City Centre CCT replacement. We're looking to upgrade the cameras across the city centre and expend £240,000 over a 3-year period, and the request is to agree to that expenditure and include the costs within the Vehicles, Plant and Equipment Capital Programme. The third one is to approve a grant to one of our partners called Ripley's, who we've been working with on the PAUSE programme, and there is a request to put additional funding into this programme so that we can carry on with the programme for another 12 years to help some very vulnerable women in the city, and based on the results that we've had from the first year of the programme, the results are very positive indeed, and we've sought some funding from Derby Homes, and the balance to the costs of running the programme are part of the recommendations tonight. The next one is we've talked on item 10 tonight about the existing funding that the Council has received with the 10 partner authorities across Derbyshire County, is asking for approval to bid again for a next round of funding that the government have introduced for 1920 to carry on with the second year of the business rates pilot, which will again be very beneficial for us as a city council, as well as our partners within the county, the district councils and the county councils, and that bid needs to be in by the 3rd week in September, and it's asking for approval that we make that bid. And the final recommendation is to seek delegated approval of Cabinet tonight to the Strategic Director of Communities in Place and myself as the Strategic Director of Corporate Resources in consultation with the respective cabinet member to put some bids into a fund that's been set up across the county, which is known as the D2 Regeneration Pilot Programme, to put in some bids that would benefit this city. And the reason asking for the delegation is that these bids need to be in to the D2 board by the end of this week. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Executive Scrutiny looked at this again last night and came with two recommendations. I'm guessing they're both in relation to the pooling of the business rates funding. Well, I'm not guessing. I think that's what they're about. The first one was to recommend that Council Cabinet utilise 3.2 million anticipated from to the 1920 business rates retention pilot to support the closure of the gap agenda. I suppose two questions there. It's anticipated funding from the 1920 to 2019-20 business rates retention pilot, which we are bidding for, but by no means we have got access to, and would allocation of funds to try and deal with closing the gap issues be a line of funding or funding that this pilot would support, please?
Chair, just to confirm the numbers there, that if we were to be successful with the bid, the amount of money that we would get as a council, that we would be able to retain, because the proposal would be that we would still put 30% of the funding towards the D2 Regeneration Fund fund. The amount of that we would be able to retain as a council is around about £3.2 million based on our forecasts. I think my read of the Exec Scrutiny Board last night was, should we be successful, the Cabinet may wish to look to expend that windfall funding towards the closing of the gap. My view would be that that is something that you would consider in the next budget process if we were to be successful.
So just for clarification, would it be common practice to try and allocate something that we haven't actually got yet?
I think the wording would be for you to consider that, I think, would be a more appropriate wording than utilise at this stage, because it's all subject to the bid being successful.
Okay, and the second recommendation from Corporate Scrutiny last night was to recommend that Council Cabinet circulate details of bids submitted to strands 2 and 3 of the D2 business pilot for 2018-19 pooled fund to members under the exempts section of the Cabinet agenda. And if I heard you right, you confirmed that that process is still ongoing and bids will be submitted on Friday, but they're not complete at this point. Okay. So yes, Councillor Ralston.
Just in relation to this, as Mr McClure has just referred to, this is anticipated funds, and yes, absolutely, we'll consider all our options for it within the 2019-20 budgets, but we are in difficult budget times and we've got to fill some gaps, so we'll have a look at all the alternatives. So we can't utilise it directly as at this point, but we would definitely consider it and look into that, closing the gap fund going forward.
Okay, any other contributions? Yes, Councillor Eldred.
I think the closing the gap has been identified as by the Derby Partnership as being the most important priority for the city, and that their main goal would be closing the gap, and that's where the recommendation comes from. And when that partnership were asked what the most important issues facing the city were, they talked about promoting social mobility, tackling inequality. We do have areas within the city of poor housing, unemployment, poor health and poverty, alongside other areas in the city where people are doing obviously a lot better. There are issues in terms of the potential for European Social Fund money to be lost post-Brexit, and some of that money would obviously, go towards these kind of projects. And I think, this is one of the biggest issues facing this city, inequality, poverty, poor housing, and the need to close the gap between those people that are well off and those people that aren't so well off, either financially or in other means. And so it has been identified across the city by our partners as a key priority, and I think that should be considered for utilisation of this money, particularly given that such a large chunk of the pooled money, the D2 money from this year, has actually gone to businesses and supporting the private sector. So this is kind of about creating balance, isn't it? And about creating the opportunity, so we're not just focusing on economic growth through the private sector, but what we're actually doing is we're talking about lifting everybody in the city so that everybody can make the most of the opportunities that are presented to them.
Thank you for that. I don't think there's any dispute in relation to prioritising the gap situation, but it's quite clear that we're not in a position to actually utilise money that is only anticipated at this point, but that will be given due consideration in this year's budget, round never mind next year's. So we're unable to, my interpretation is we're unable to accept that recommendation. Councillor, and subject to what Councillor Skelton's got to say, of course.
Right. I was just wondering, because as far as I know, the whole issue of sort of closing the gap and the fact of this potential money, obviously we've had it this past year, how aware are officers of all levels within the council of this? Because obviously there could be some that, I'm sure there are, that are not aware of this potential for money, and obviously sensible ideas about what it could be spent on may well come from all parts of council employees.
I suppose the comment would be that, officers are regularly talking with their senior managers about what other initiatives would be helpful to deliver council priorities, and those discussions are carried on through cabinet members. So I think the priorities will come forward, and I think it shouldn't just be focused on a particular pot of money. It's about being able to offer members advice about how we can look to deliver a whole range of initiatives. So, but I'd like to think that the ideas and the understanding that officers have around their services do come up through through senior managers into cabinet members.
Okay, Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Actually, I just wanted to give Councillor Eldred some assurances, because I do believe in what she's raising is a really valid point. And I want to give her those assurances based on the opportunity areas, which I know you're fully aware of, in terms of that social mobility, that closing the gap, the raising attainment, the aspirations. They're all key areas that the opportunity areas are working on. And actually provisional results across the key stages are showing some good results there. So I'd like to give you those assurances that that work is ongoing at the moment. It's not something that we're not looking at. It's something that's being worked very hard on across the city. And I just wanted to make sure that that wasn't missed out there.
Okay, thank you for that. So for clarity in relation to the Scrutiny Board resolutions, we're unable to agree the first one, and the second one's not possible because the bids aren't completed. It's an ongoing process and will be dealt with in due course. So we have to refer to, can I have 2.1 to 2.7 on this one, Roy? Thank you. Recommendations 2.1 to 2.7. I was obviously racing ahead before. We can agree those. Thank you, Chair.